Okay, so now I want to talk about the solution process. All right, so just a little bit of review from a few days ago when we talked about the beginning part of solutions. Your solute is what is being dissolved. Usually this is the lesser quantity. And your solvent is what the solute is being dissolved into. So for example, when you make sweet tea, you dissolve the sugar into the tea. The tea is the solvent because there's more of it, and the sugar is the solute because there's less of it, and it is what is being dissolved into the solvent. Just a little bit of review. All right, so let's talk about solubility. Okay, we talked about aqueous solutions back when we talked about balancing equations, but I know it's been a little bit since we did that. This is a solution in which water is your solvent. So water is what is doing the dissolving. Okay, so from these types of solutions, we have two main types. We have a saturated solution. This is a solution that contains the maximum amount of solute that can be dissolved in that type of solution. So for instance, when you guys are making sweet tea, eventually the sugar stops dissolving. You can only dissolve so much sugar into your sweet tea, and then it all just starts to settle towards the bottom. So this would be a saturated solution. Once you reach that point where it can't dissolve anymore, you are saturated. An unsaturated solution is a solution in which a small amount of solute is dissolved, however, more can be dissolved. So again, if we're using our sweet tea, you just put a little bit of sugar in there, but you can still dissolve more. You have an unsaturated solution, which means you can dissolve more solute. And then the third type of solution is something called a supersaturated solution. This is a solution that contains more solute than it can theoretically hold at a given temperature. Okay, so when you guys are making sweet tea, don't you usually put your sugar in your warm tea because it makes it easier to dissolve sugar into it? And then as it cools, none of the sugar comes out of solution, so oftentimes it's actually a supersaturated solution, which is why it's so hard to add sugar after the fact once it's cooled down, because technically it's already holding as much or even more sugar than it technically should. Another example of this is syrup. Syrup has to be heated up in order to get all of the sugar dissolved in it. That's why it's so thick. Usually if you're dealing with a supersaturated solution, which you guys are going to actually watch a lab here in a little bit that'll show you what it looks like, crystallization can be initiated if a small crystal is added. So if you have a supersaturated solution, which again means it's holding more solute than it should, all you have to do is add a teeny tiny crystal of that solute, and it will just start to crystallize, form a solid from what appears to be out of nowhere. Okay, so here is a picture. So if on the left we have a unsaturated solution right here, and if you notice we just have a little bit of solute being dissolved into it. Here we have a saturated solution, which means more solute's being dissolved into it, but it's still at the point where it hasn't been oversaturated. So it's holding the perfect amount of solute. And then over here we have a supersaturated solution, which when you add crystals, they start to crystallize towards the bottom, and eventually it'll move up towards the top. Okay, so what is solubility? Well, when we're talking about solubility, we're also talking about two other types of things. We're talking about something called dilution. This is the process of adding solvent to lower the concentration of solute in a solution. So for instance, with me and my daughter, I give her apple juice, but you're not supposed to give it to her straight, so I actually dilute her apple juice with water. I'm trying to make it less concentrated so it's not as sweet, it's not as thick, it doesn't have as much sugar in it. You can do this with anything. You could add more water to your sweet tea to make not only your tea less sweet, but to make your tea weaker. The next thing we're going to talk about is something called solution equilibrium. You guys should all know what equilibrium is. It's the point in which things are equal. When we're talking about solutions, this is the point at which the rate of dissolution, so how quickly something is dissolving, is equal to the rate of crystallization, which means how quickly things are coming out of solution. So basically at equilibrium, things are dissolving as fast as they are crystallizing. So it should stay at equilibrium. You should not be able to see any of the solute. Alright, so when we are talking about dissolving, and you guys all do this whenever you're trying to dissolve anything, there are three things that can affect the rate or how fast something can dissolve. First of all, if you increase the surface area. So for instance, let's go back to our sweet tea. I'm just going to beat this analogy into the ground. If you are trying to dissolve a cube of sugar versus just putting free sugar down in there, the free sugar is going to dissolve much faster than the cube of sugar because there is more surface area on the free sugar. Agitation of your solute. So you can make things dissolve faster if you agitate them. Simply stir it. If you stir your sweet tea, you're going to get your sugar to dissolve faster. And then lastly, if you heat your solvent, if you heat up your tea before you add the sugar, it'll make it dissolve a lot quicker. Alright, so now what I would like for you guys to do is I want you to work with your group. You can just work with your partner that's sitting next to you, 2 to 3 people in each group. I want you guys to kind of think about a couple of questions. First of all, I want you to come up with 2 examples of each of the following. I want you to come up with 2 examples of an unsaturated solution, 2 examples of a saturated solution, and 2 examples of a supersaturated solution. The catch is you can't use any examples that I've mentioned so far in the movie. So try to come up with 6 new ones. I would also like for you to think about an example of a dissolution and explain how the 3 previous factors will affect the rate of dissolution on that example. Again, I gave you the example of sweet tea, so in order to get my sugar to dissolve faster, I can use free sugar. I can break it up into really small pieces. I can stir it and I can heat it. So I want you guys to come up with another example of when you would dissolve something and how those 3 previous ways of increasing the rate of dissolution will speed up how fast you can dissolve something. Again, you can't use any examples that I used previously in notes. I'm going to give you guys, 5 to 10 minutes to do this, and then we are going to share them as a class. So hopefully, this is going to be for a practice grade, so hopefully you guys are going to put forth a little bit of effort.